now is that time when we turn within for our spiritual communion. We drink of that living water. We eat of that bread of life. We connect with our source. We are one with Spirit. And we remember. We remember by allowing all that is to simply be in this moment. No worries, no doubts, no hopes, no dreams, no fears. We simply allow this moment to be, and we allow ourselves to be in this moment. To reach out into the energy, feeling the love and the grace that are ever ours. There is a word, prevenient. We use it to speak of God's grace. It is that grace that is ours unearned. No matter who we are, no matter where we are on our path, we can simply stand in the light of God's Son and know that we are loved, that the universe is for us. God is good, and we are one. One with Spirit, one with all that is and all that is yet to be. As we breathe into this moment, connecting ourselves to all that is now, we focus on that simple connection, that breath, the beating of our hearts. The very vibration in the air that is the music and the love that we share. And for a moment, we allow ourselves simply to experience this love and this grace and this joy as we commune with our Spirit, Father, Mother, God in the silence. like a cold drink of water on a hot summer's day. Like the first bite of food when we are hungry. This time in silence, this honoring of our connection to the Spirit of God refreshes us, nourishes us, and sustains us for all that we do, for all the work that we do in our own consciousness, in our own lives, for all that we do as we reach out to our families, this church, our community, places of work, our nation, our world. Whenever we feel drained, whenever we feel tired, whenever we feel like we cannot go on another day, it's time. It's time to remember to return to communion, to drink of that water, to eat that bread that sustains us far beyond any physical manifestation, to feel the energy of God's love vibrating through us, living as us, being us in this world. We remember. And we know grace. We know love. We know joy. For the ability to live in the kingdom of heaven right here, right now. We are so deeply grateful. We say thank you. Thank you, sweet Spirit. So it is. Thank you. Oh, you should have been wearing something green. Yeah. So, probably most of the churches around are talking about moms here on Mother's Day. You weren't expecting that from me, were you? It's funny how things work out. I'll tell you a quick story about myself and how I left the Baptist church. I was already kind of self-identifying as an agnostic. I'd actually been self-identifying as an agnostic when I was still in high school, and they made me president of the Baptist Youth Fellowship, which is kind of like our YOU. It was my friends, I kept telling them, I was like, hey, and they said, well, Charles, it's your turn. Yeah. I spent a lot of time at the Vienna Baptist Church, small town in West Virginia. I grew up in it, and I wanted to hang out with my friends, so I kept going. My freshman year in college, I came home for Mother's Day, and I go to the church with her, and it was a different minister than I'd either grown up with up until my teenage years, and then we had another guy from the time I was about 13 until I graduated. So it was a new guy. And on Mother's Day, he gave a message based on an Old Testament scripture, I can't remember which one, about a woman who committed adultery. I was like, the more I sat and listened, the more aggravated I got. And I finally said, you know what? I am never coming back here. So hopefully none of you will say that after today, because I'm not talking about mothers so much. We've been in a series on prosperity, and the way that the calendar worked out, This was one of the few times when I actually had 4 weeks in a row uninterrupted by my military commitments that I could do this 4-week series. And it's prosperity for you. We have our final class this afternoon. If you want to jump in at the very tail end, we'd be glad to have you. If you would just like to grab that workbook, I still think we have a few of them left in the bookstore. And they're the kind of thing that you can go through. There's a lot of space in them for journaling. There are daily affirmations for each day of the 4 weeks that you choose to go through the process. So it's a very good series. And today is the final day in that series. And what we're talking about is something that I was almost surprised when I got to this point in the series the first time I read through it. It was written by Reverend Alice Anderson, Cynthia Alice Anderson. She says I was introduced to her as Alice, and she said that she made up with her first name. She hadn't used it for a long time, so she made up with it. So she's now Cynthia Alice. She was here about a month ago. It was the first week of this series. She's the author of the series. And what I found interesting is that in all the other prosperity series I have studied and taught and been through, she brought up something that I don't think I've seen anyone else. It's not in the 4 T's. It's not in Keys to the Kingdom. It's not part of Edwin Gaines's 4 Spiritual Laws of Prosperity. It's not in any of the things that I've read. It's connection. And you'd think that we would remember, or that we would understand how important our connection is to everything that is in terms of feeding and growing our prosperity, but I think a lot of times we overlook that piece. So I'm really glad to be able to talk about that, and especially about how it affects our prosperity. And I want to make it very clear that when I say prosperity, I'm not just talking about how much money we have in the bank, right? Monetary prosperity is a small piece of our abundance. Our abundance includes not only our financial prosperity, but our health, our relationships, our right livelihood, or our creative life. The purpose, what we're here to do, what we have to give to the universe. And our spiritual growth, our spiritual life. When all of those areas of life are in balance and kind of on that upward spiral, that's a life that we can call truly prosperous. The richest person in the world may feel very empty inside. And I sometimes think that people who are possessed by the idea of amassing monetary wealth are in some ways very empty inside. Jesus made reference to that when he said it's easier to get a camel through the eye of a needle than to get a rich person into the kingdom of heaven. I think it's exactly what he was talking about when he said that. We can't kind of go overboard on any one of those areas and think that that's going to be what makes us feel good, that's what's going to make us feel wealthy. In some ways, it is this last piece of this prosperity series. It's our connections, our connection to God, our connection to our planet, our connection to ourselves, and our connections to one another that truly make us feel rich. Boy, I felt rich last night. The level of connection that was present was palpable. You could actually feel that. But the first thing I want to talk about is our connection with Spirit, our connection to God, because that is essentially our connection to everything. The scientists now have been, working over there in Europe to find what they call the God particle, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, that's the Higgs boson, something like that. Anyway, it is a particle that can exist as both matter and energy. Am I still on the right track? Okay. But essentially, if we boil the entire universe down, all the matter and all the energy, it all comes down to one thing. And that's really what I think they're looking for. It's like, what's the one thing that's the one common denominator? And science will eventually find a thing, whether it's the Higgs boson or something that Higgs bosons are made up of. If there's another thing that's smaller. The funny thing is when we try to tie our spirituality to science, today's science is tomorrow's belly laugh. You know, we look back on what people thought was science 100 years ago, and it's like, oh, psh, you know, they didn't know anything. But there are some underlying principles that, you know, remain the same. Charles Fillmore talked about substance, you know, and I think he was talking about Higgs bosons or whatever they are. Is that underlying material that everything has in common. And another word for it is God, right? I know that it's kind of difficult to wrap our minds around when we come from a theological background where God is something separate. God lives out there in heaven, and he might show up occasionally in our lives. You know, it's called divine intervention, right? When he meddles a little bit, and then he goes back to heaven, right? Where we'll meet him when we die, right? We'll die, and then if we're good and we believe the things we're supposed to believe, we get to go through the gates, the magic gates that has somebody guarding them, right? And then we get to go live with God. That's a theology that a lot of us grew up with, right? I'm not making this up. Trust me, I did not make that one up, okay? Because it never worked for me, you know, and I had problems with it, which is how I became an 18-year-old agnostic president of the Baptist Youth Fellowship. There's something missing in that to me. And I am so deeply grateful that I have found it in unity. You know, our first principle says that there is only one presence and one power throughout the universe and in our lives, God. Omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence. God is everywhere present. God is everything present. What a difference that is. And there are times when we as humans try to pretend that we're separate from God. You know, we want to feel that we're separate from God. Our egos want to separate us from God so that our egos can be important. Way more important than God, right? And that can get us into a lot of trouble. It sure got me into a lot of trouble over the years. When we do that, we're blocking ourselves from all that is good in God, all that's there for us. That divine flow that is both energy and matter. It's our connection, I can't even say it's our connection to God that is our source of prosperity, because it underlies everything. It's our awareness of our connection to God and our ability not to try to stop it is what is really responsible for us being prosperous in a very deep way. So one of the most important things for us to do is to remember that we are one with God. How many of you have heard or remember the song that we sing a lot in Unity, The Father and I Are One? The Father and I are one. The Father and I are one. Are one, are one, are one, are one. The Father and I are one. Now, some of us might choose to sing that, the Mother and I are one, right? You know, because we do that divine feminine thing. And then there's, you know, the gender non-specific branch of the family who would sing, the Spirit and I are one. So what I'd like for us to do so we'll remember that is we're going to sing, and we can sing that as a round. So do we have any father people? The Father and I are one. Anybody want to sing that? Wow. Just one or two of us? Okay. All right. Do we have any Mother and I are one people? Okay. How about Spirit and I people? We got a bunch of you. Okay. So you guys can go last. We're going to sing this as a round. So I'm going to have Steve and Ashley help me with this. So the way it works is we'll have the Father and I are one people started off, all three of us. And then after we do the Father and I are one, the Father and I are one, then the Mother and I are one people come in. Ashley, you want to lead the Mother and I people?
Sure.
Okay. And then after they do the Mother and I are one, the Mother and I are one, then the Spirit and I are one people are going to come in. Steve, you're going to take the Spirit and I people? Okay.
I was a Spirit guy anyway.
Okay. You're a Spirit guy anyway. All right. What key are we in?
Whatever key
Good
you start
question.
at.
One. Okay.
That's probably a good key.
Is that a good key? All right. So Us father people, we're going to start it off. Give me, right? The Father and I are one. The Father and I are one. Are one, are one, are one, are one. The Father and I are one. The Father and I are one. The Father and I are one. Keep going.
The Mother and I are one. The Father and I are one.
Are one, are one, are one, are one. The Mother and I are one.
Around, but it's okay.
The Father and I are one. The Father and I
With the mother.
are one.
Ready.
The Mother and I are one.
The one.
The Mother and I are one. Are one, are one, are one, are one.
The Spirit and I are one.
The Mother and I are one.
Are one.
The Mother and I are one. Are one, are one, are one, are one. The Mother and I are one. The Mother and I are one.
We got to work on our ability to sing rounds, but I think you get the idea. So in those moments when we feel alone, in those moments when we're looking for something to be connected to, we have to remember that. By whatever name you want to call it, Father, Mother, Spirit, it doesn't matter. The universe. What we have to remember is that we are connected deeply because we are part of it. We are made of the same stuff as the universe. We are made of the same stuff as God. It's not sacrilegious to say, to know that we are part of God. We're part of God's love, part of God's heart. More than anything, I think, simply knowing that steps us into the flow of all that is in God when we understand that we are an integral part of that rather than apart from it. We have the ability to prosper not just financially, but in all those other areas. Unity's second principle really applies to the second thing I want to talk about today, and that is our connection with ourselves. When we say that we are a part of God, that the divine lives in us, we can know our connection to ourselves. I know for me personally, for a long, long time, I felt disconnected from the world. And part of that stemmed from my disconnection with God. But it extended into my own perception of myself. And, for me, it led into addictive behaviors that expressed in a lot of different unhealthy ways over a very long period of my life. In my other spiritual family, we talk about something that many of us struggle to do, and that's being comfortable in my own skin. I think so many of us know what it's like to look in the mirror and be a little disappointed. Whether it's a feeling of low self-esteem or anger, guilt, whatever it might be, so many of us struggle with ourselves. It is almost impossible to express real abundance in all those 5 areas of our life when we don't like that person in the mirror for some reason or another, or we don't think they're worthy for some reason or another. So important that we can honor ourselves, that we know how to love ourselves. As Alice points out in the text, when Jesus talked about our new commandments, you are to love one another as you love yourselves. Well, the first thing we have to do in order to love other people is to be able to love ourselves. And some people think that self-love may be self-indulgent, or that it may be in some way taking away from our love for others or our love for God. But the truth is, if we are unable to love ourselves, there's no real way that we can love anything else. So we have to ask ourselves, what practices do we have to do to get back into that place where we really love ourselves, we really honor ourselves? For some of us, it's, simply, we got to start with the recognition that we are lovable, that we are beloved by the universe. I want everybody to just put your arms around yourself for a moment and just maybe close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. Do you feel that person you are? You might have to say to yourself or think to yourself, I am lovable and I am beloved. Can we say that together? I am lovable and I am beloved. Give yourself a little squeeze. Go ahead and come back. That person that you just loved is a beloved child of God, is a beloved part of this universe. And no matter how you may have criticized that person in the past, today, right here, right now, you can know that that person, you, are exactly who you are supposed to be right now. You're exactly where you're supposed to be on your journey. Your soul's evolution called you to be right where you are. The stupidest thing I ever did was part of what got me here today, so it was worth it. That part of me that wants to be less than and unworthy and beat myself up sometimes at least wants to criticize me for all the people that I've hurt. But if it hadn't been for every person I ever hurt, I wouldn't be here helping people today. I had to learn what I'm capable of on both sides of the spectrum in order to be able to really give. And in order to be able to really meet people who are in a place still where they're trying to find their way out of the dark. I had to walk in darkness to be able to lead people out of it. And the same is true for all of us in one way or another. You may wonder, why me? Why me? Why this? And sometimes the only reason I can come up with is there's another person waiting for your hand. Why did I have to be an alcoholic? I don't know, but I know that because I've been able to reach out a hand, and I may have helped save the lives of other people. That's good enough for me in this lifetime. That'll do. So what that has allowed me to do is to forgive myself. And that's a huge piece of being connected to who we are. When we can let go of those things in our past, when we can forgive ourselves and say, you know what, it's okay to be me right where I am right now. And if we want, we can set goals going forward. We can try to be more than we are. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a great thing. We want to keep riding that spiral up in consciousness towards complete knowledge of our oneness with God. It's another long way of saying enlightenment, I guess. But it's not a straight shot. You know, we don't jump from being one-cell creatures to enlightenment without taking a journey first. So we are where we are. And hopefully we get connected to ourselves. And then what that springs us into is the last thing I want to talk about this morning, and that's being connected to each other. You know, if I could have kept Barry up all night, maybe we could show you what connection looks like. We could have spliced together some of the video that Jared shot last night at our fundraiser, and I wouldn't have to talk at all. You could just see what connection with others looks like. We live in a culture that is becoming more and more isolationist. You know, we spend less time with other human beings and more time with glowing screens. Now, I will admit that there are ways of connecting with some of those glowing screens that have been very valuable. I have reconnected with a lot of people from my past, and I've really enjoyed that. But what it's really been valuable in doing is helping me actually reconnect with them. There's a whole community of us that I went to college with, and it's been really great to see what other people are up to in their lives these days. But you know what was really great? Is when that connection turned into, hey, we're all going to go back to Morgantown, West Virginia, and we're all going to spend a weekend together, and we're going to actually see each other and love on each other and hear each other's stories and spend time together. You know, that's when that glowing screen thing kind of really became valuable in my life. Alice uses the word betray when she talks about how isolating from other people, betrays our purpose. It betrays our relationship with God and what we're here to do. It's a very strong word, and I don't think it's misused. You know, again, going from my own experience, when I was engaging in those unhealthy behaviors, when I was wrapped up in my addiction, I isolated, you know, and it was a vicious circle, really. You know, I isolated to drink, and I drank because I was isolated, and it just kind of kept going and going and going. And as I've talked to other people and counseled other people who are involved in addictions of various kinds, that is a real common thread for a lot of us, is isolation. We pull away. It even mentions it in the big book, how we become shivering citizens of the kingdom of King Alcohol. We don't see other people. We don't connect to other people. And we go back into that place where we live in fantasy. When we realize what other people mean to us, particularly when we realize what the people that we just lost meant to us, you know, that's one of the few things that can save us. You know, and that's what saved me at the end of the day. When I realized I was losing my children, I'd lost my wife. That's what it took. So I know my connection to those people saved my life. And it's certainly a huge part of my abundance today. When I see what happened last night, when I could feel the energy of love in the air, I could literally feel it. You know, it was like the air was thick with it there. I know what abundance feels like and how connection feeds that. What we have to do is remember to take time for other people and to kind of get out of our story and to remember to listen to them. This goes back to what Jesus was doing as he attempted to change the idea of his culture's God and how we become like God. I've talked about this before. If you remember, the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, The idea of what God was holy. And in their culture, that expressed itself as the purity code. They said, be holy as God is holy. And what Jesus said was, be compassionate as God is compassionate. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your enemies. If we could look our enemies right in the face when they've slapped us and simply say, okay, if you need to do it again, here's the other one, if that's what you need in this moment. What level of compassion does that show? I don't think that Jesus was telling us to be doormats. What I think he was asking us to do was teach people what it means to be really connected at the deepest possible level. It's telling people, when you hurt me, you're hurting yourself. Do you really need to hurt yourself again? Really? When we are willing to live in that connection, and sometimes it causes great pain when we have to let go of our connections. I know. I've been going through that. But at the same time, I know there's God in there. Just like all the things that I did as an individual, all the connections that I've had with people. This past week, I was in North Carolina. And some of you may have seen the pictures that I took of the amphitheater that I stage managed in 31 years ago. It's all the buildings are torn down. It's been overcome with foliage. All that's left is the concrete floor of the stage and the concrete steps of the house, where the audience was. It's abandoned. But it was in that theater that I made my first connection to Birmingham, Alabama. I was the production stage manager, and the villain was a guy named Walter Harrison. I've talked about Walt. And he's buried in Bessemer now. But he and his wife are the ones who introduced me to the mother of my children. And she's the one that introduced me to unity. And she found unity in this sanctuary, where she used to come once upon a time with her Aunt Paula. It's amazing how our connections reach out to us. Years, decades later, they change our lives. When we are willing to honor that, when we are willing to be vulnerable to that, amazing things happen. Prosperity happens in ways we never could have imagined. Connection is the source of our prosperity. Our connection to God, our connection to ourselves, our connections to one another. We just have to remember not to isolate, but to allow whatever happens to happen out there in God's universe. Because there's some way it will come out for good. Some way. Please join me in prayer. Sweet Spirit, we are so deeply grateful for all of our connections. We feel your presence right here, right now. In the breath that we take, the blood flowing through our veins. In the movement of the air around us, the sounds of the people. You're present in the floor we walk on, in the sky above us. And we feel your presence in us. We feel your presence as us. We see you in the light of every smile, in every eye. And for this connection to all that is, and for the joy that we feel in seeing it, expressed so many ways, we say thank you. Thank you, God. So it is.